There is a curious thing that happens the moment you decide you must take charge of life. The instant you tighten your grip, life begins to slip through your fingers like water, and the harder you squeeze, the faster it escapes. This is not because life is cruel, nor because you are incompetent, but because life, by its very nature, cannot be held. Imagine for a moment trying to catch a river. You step into it, confident, determined, sleeves rolled up, and you say, "Now then, I will manage this, I will direct it, I will make it flow where I want." And of course, the river laughs, not mockingly, but playfully, and flows around you, through you, over you, entirely unconcerned with your plans. The river does not resist you. It simply continues being a river. Now, most of us have been taught, very carefully, very thoroughly, that the secret to happiness is control. Control your thoughts, control your emotions, control your future, control other people, if possible, though we are often more polite about how we phrase that. And so we spend our lives clenching our jaws, tightening our shoulders, holding our breath, trying to keep everything in place. But have you noticed that the moments you remember as truly alive, deeply alive, were never moments of control? They were moments when control vanished. When you were laughing so hard you forgot yourself. When you were in love and not calculating the outcome. When you were listening to music and time simply dissolved. In those moments, you weren't managing life, you were being lived by it. You see, the great misunderstanding begins with the idea that there is a you on one side and life on the other. As if you were a commander standing outside the universe, issuing orders to existence. But where, precisely, is this separate commander? Where does you end and life begin? If you look closely, you will find that what you call me is a process. Breathing happens, thoughts happen, feelings arise and disappear, the heart beats without consulting you. Digestion occurs without your supervision. Even your so-called decisions appear in consciousness the way clouds appear in the sky. You don't order them to arrive, they simply do. And yet, having noticed all this, we insist, yes, but I must be in control. Control of what? Of breathing? Try it, see how long you can manage without eventually surrendering back to the breath that breathes itself. Control of thoughts? The next thought you will have, what will it be? If you truly controlled your mind, you would already know. This desire for control comes from fear, a very understandable fear, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of not knowing what will happen next, the fear of death, and so we build a little fortress called the ego. And we say, inside this fortress, I will be safe. But the fortress is made of ideas, and ideas cannot stop the flow of life. The ego, you see, is a marvelous illusion, a useful one, to be sure, like a label on a jar. It helps us navigate daily life. But when we mistake the label for the contents, when we believe the idea of ourselves is who we actually are, then we begin to suffer. Because the ego's job is to maintain control, and life's nature is change. So the ego is always fighting a losing battle. It says, I must remain the same. Life says, everything changes. It says, I must secure the future. Life says, the future does not exist. It says, I must avoid death. Life says, death is part of the dance. And so the ego becomes anxious, tense, endlessly busy. It plans, calculates, worries, and calls this responsibility, but underneath it all is a deep mistrust of existence, a feeling that if you don't keep watch, everything will go terribly wrong. Let me tell you a little story. A man once came to me and said, I cannot relax, I feel that if I stop trying, my life will fall apart. I asked him, have you ever fallen asleep? He said, of course. And how did you do it? I asked. Well, he replied, I lay down and tried to sleep. Ah, I said, but the harder you try to sleep, the more awake you become. Sleep happens only when you stop trying to make it happen. Life is very much like that. You cannot force yourself to be spontaneous. You cannot command peace to arrive. You cannot order love to appear on schedule. The more you chase these things, the more elusive they become, because they arise only when the effort to control relaxes. Now, this does not mean you become passive, indifferent, or irresponsible. That is another misunderstanding. Letting go of control is not the same as giving up. It is not resignation. It is not apathy. It is participation without obsession. Think of dancing. If you are constantly watching your feet, calculating every move, terrified of making a mistake, The dance becomes rigid and awkward. But when you trust the music, when you let the rhythm move you, something extraordinary happens. The dance dances you. Life is not something you perform correctly. It is something you participate in fully. And this is where the paradox reveals itself. The moment you stop trying to control life, life begins to work with you. Not because you have mastered it, but because you are no longer resisting it. Consider sailing. You do not control the wind. You cannot command it to blow east or west. But you can learn how to set your sails. You can learn how to move with the wind, rather than curse it for not obeying you. Most people, however, are standing on their boats shouting at the sky. And then they wonder why they are exhausted. The fear beneath control is the fear of losing oneself. But what if the self you are afraid of losing is precisely the illusion that causes the suffering? What if what you truly are cannot be lost? When you let go, you do not disappear, you expand. You discover that you are not a fragile thing needing constant protection, but a process as ancient and resilient as the stars. You are not a stranger in this universe. You are an expression of it. And so the real question is not, how do I control my life? The real question is, what happens when I trust it? Not blindly, not foolishly, but deeply, the way you trust your own heartbeat, the way you trust that after exhaling, the inhale will come. Because it always does. And when you see this, not as an idea, but as a living truth, you begin to relax into the great movement. You stop bracing yourself against existence and start dancing with it. Life was never asking to be controlled, it was asking to be lived. And it is at this point, right here, in this gentle surrender, that the most astonishing thing becomes clear. You were never separate from the flow you were trying to manage. You were the flow, all along. And if you stay with that realization, if you do not rush past it, if you do not try to turn it into a belief or a slogan, but simply let it sink in, you may begin to notice something quietly revolutionary. The sense of being a separate doer starts to soften. Not dramatically at first, not with fireworks or thunder, but gently, like mist lifting from a field in the morning. You begin to see that much of what you called my effort was really tension. Much of what you called my responsibility was really fear wearing a respectable disguise. And much of what you called my control was simply resistance to the natural movement of things. This does not make you careless. On the contrary, it makes you attentive. Because when you are no longer obsessed with controlling life, you can finally listen to it. You can hear when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to hold on and when to let go. Control is noisy, trust is quiet. And in that quietness, life reveals its intelligence. You see, the universe is not a clumsy mechanism blundering along at random. It is an extraordinarily subtle process, endlessly balancing itself, adjusting itself, playing with itself. Trees know how to grow without instruction. Rivers know how to find the sea without a map. Your body knows how to heal a wound without consulting a textbook. And yet, we imagine that human life, this small expression of the same universe, must be micromanaged every second. Or else it will collapse into chaos. What a strange lack of confidence in existence. It is as though a wave in the ocean were to say, I must control the sea, or I will disappear, not realizing that its very being as a wave is inseparable from the movement of the whole ocean. The wave rises, falls, crashes, dissolves, and the ocean continues. Nothing is lost. This is why the fear of death lies so close to the desire for control. Because if you believe you are a separate thing, a little island of me, surrounded by a hostile world, then death looks like annihilation. It looks like the ultimate loss of control. But if you see that you are a process, not a thing, an activity, not an object, then death appears in a very different light. It becomes not an interruption of life, but a transformation within it, like the end of a wave, which is also the continuation of the sea. Life and death are not opposites. They are partners in the same dance. And so the attempt to control life in order to avoid death is like trying to keep a song from ending. You may prolong the final note, but in doing so, you lose the music. The beauty of the song lies precisely in its movement, its change, its impermanence. This is difficult for the ego to accept, because the ego wants guarantees. It wants permanence, it wants certainty, it wants a script, it wants to know how everything will turn out before it begins. But life does not work that way. Life improvises. And the more you insist on a script, the less alive the performance becomes. Have you ever noticed how strained people become when they are trying very hard to be themselves? As if the self were something you could manufacture through effort. The irony, of course, is that the self you are trying to be is already happening, without effort, when you stop trying. You do not need to force authenticity, you only need to stop pretending. This is why spiritual awakening is so often described as a kind of falling rather than a climbing. A falling out of the illusion of control, a falling into trust, a falling into what has always been the case. And this fall is frightening at first, because you feel as though you are letting go of the steering wheel. But then you realize, perhaps with a soft laugh, that there was no steering wheel to begin with. Life was driving itself. And it was doing a rather marvelous job. Now, let us be very clear. Trusting life does not mean you will always get what you want. It does not mean you will avoid pain, loss, or confusion. It does not mean everything will go according to your preferences. It means something far more radical. It means that whatever happens, you are not fundamentally opposed to it. You stop turning every experience into a problem that must be resisted, fixed, or escaped. You allow joy to be joyful and sorrow to be sorrow. You allow success to be enjoyed and failure to be instructive. You allow uncertainty to be what it is, uncertainty, without immediately demanding answers. In other words, you stop arguing with reality. And this saves an extraordinary amount of energy. Think of how much of your life has been spent mentally saying, "This shouldn't be happening," when it clearly is. Think of how much tension arises not from events themselves, but from your resistance to them. Pain may be inevitable, but suffering, psychological suffering, is largely optional. It arises when you demand that life be other than it is. When you let go of that demand, you find that you can meet life as it comes, moment by moment, without being shattered by it. You bend instead of break. You respond instead of react. You become fluid. And fluidity, not rigidity, is the mark of real strength. A rigid tree snaps in the storm, a flexible one survives. So too with the human spirit. The person who must always be in control is brittle. One unexpected change, one loss, one surprise, and their world collapses. But the person who has learned to dance with uncertainty moves through change with a certain grace, even when it hurts. Because they are not clinging to an image of how life should be. They are living it as it is. And this brings us to a final, subtle point. When you stop trying to control life, you do not become a victim of it. Quite the opposite, you discover that what you truly are is not something that can be victimized at all. The roles of winner and loser, controller and controlled, belong to the game, and you are not merely a piece on the board. You are the board, you are the game, you are the playing of it. From this perspective, even your attempts to control life were part of life's play. Even your fear, your struggle, your confusion, they were not mistakes. They were movements in the dance. Necessary movements, beautiful, in their own way. And so there is nothing to regret, nothing to fix, nothing to force. Only something to notice. That right now, before you improve yourself, before you figure everything out, before you secure the future, you are already participating in something vast, intelligent, and alive. Breathing is happening, hearing is happening, being is happening. Effortlessly. Life is not waiting for you to take control, it is inviting you to take part. And the invitation is always the same. Let go, trust the movement, and discover that what you were afraid of losing was never really there, while what you truly are has been here all along.